Ahoy mateys, it's time to walk the plank, fire the cannons, turn to port, and search for booty. If your players are tired of being landlubbers, it's time to set out on a more nautical adventure. Ships and ship mechanics have been around in Dungeons & Dragons for quite a while, but it's not until the recently released Ghosts of Saltmarsh that all of these aspects were greatly expanded upon for 5th edition specifically. In this video, we're going to be looking at all things ships in Dungeons & Dragons, and this includes not only the physical ships themselves and what goes into running them, but also the various people it takes to keep something so large afloat and moving. While going over these things, we'll also touch base on the various challenges one can expect to find at sea, which includes things from various natural disasters like storms, fires, and disease, and storms, underwater adventures, and obviously the occasional aquatic monster. By the end of this video, it is my hope that you'll be able to walk into your next session fully capable of running a ship and all of the aspects that go into it. Or at the very least, walk away from this video knowing that you're not a dungeon master who wants any part of ships in their campaign and simply just states your boat ride was uneventful. Let's start off by just looking at the basics of ships before diving into the nitty-gritty details of how to run them. Similar to monsters or even player characters in Dungeons & Dragons, ships have a lot of the same basic stats, including health points, AC, etc. They range from large creatures or things to gargantuan, have a certain amount of cargo capacity, and can hold various amounts of people depending on how large the ship is. They all have similar attributes similar to player characters as well, including intelligence, charisma, strength, dexterity, but all of the ones that you may expect for something like an inanimate object, like intelligence, charisma, and wisdom, are always 0. And while it may seem dumb to list out in a video, for all of you rule sticklers out there, all ships are immune to blind, frightened, charm, and other various aspects that deal with more mental capacity as they are an inanimate object, at least in most cases. With these general aspects in mind, let's start by looking at one great example of ships in general that'll help us go through the various rules associated with running one. Let's start by looking at the galley, which in breaking down its stats we can see as an example of a gargantuan-sized ship in Dungeons & Dragons. We say it's gargantuan because it takes up 26 5-foot squares long and 4 5-foot squares across, which should give you a kind of general size idea if you're trying to run it as a battle map. As such a large vessel, it can carry a ton of people, which includes 80 crew members and 40 passengers, can carry 150 tons of cargo, and moves at 4 miles per hour. Going further down in the stat block, we can see all of the various damage and condition immunities that we kind of touched on briefly before, and just beneath that lists out the various actions that this ship can take when it is its turn in combat. And that's right, you heard me correctly, and you read that first line there correctly, when it's the ship's turn, which does mean that the ship itself is going to roll initiative when you start in combat. Now, ship initiative works a little bit differently than the player characters, but it has the same basic general idea, and in the case of the galley, it's going to be taking a -3 to it from its dexterity. Now, like I said, initiative for ships does work a little bit differently and uses something called the quality score, which we're going to dive into later as well. Once it does happen to be the galley's turns, it can take 3 actions in that one round, and this is kind of a maximum value as the number of actions a ship can take is based off of the number of crewmen that are on board. If this crew member were to go down due to combat casualties or simply just an understaffed ship, they would be able to take 2 actions or even 1 action depending on how scarcely populated it is. These actions range from anything that you might expect in combat, which includes different kind of movement options depending on what kind of upgrades your ship does have, use of the weapons that are on board in order to attack, and finally the ability to turn the ship via the helm action. It should be noted as well that the ship itself isn't doing this of its own volition unless you were somehow to imbue consciousness into the ship, and thus the captain of the ship, whether that be a player character or an NPC, will be determining all of these actions in actual combat or in an actual scenario where your dungeon master has asked you to roll initiative. After the actions descriptions in a ship's stat block, we then get into a description of the rooms that are on board. Unfortunately, a galley is not a really good example of this, as it really only lists the 4 ballistae that are on board of a galley. This is not a luxury liner where there are multiple rooms that we might see in something like a sailing ship or even a warship, which has very special rooms including medical rooms, officers' quarters, storage rooms, you name it, and they're all kind of described in this part of the stat block. Listed above its statistics section, we can actually find a number of different crew types that will be found on the ship. These include the different types of special officers that one will find on board that we'll dive into right after this, the number of pure crew members or commoners that are on board that are working the ship, and then anything else notable that you might find, like a certain number of passengers, a certain number of people dedicated to pure siege equipment, etc. Certain types of ships will require certain special officers to be on board beyond just a captain. A captain is needed for any ship and is the bare minimum requirement in terms of special officers, but depending on how large the ship is, different roles may need to be fulfilled as well. These special officers give you a general idea as a Dungeon Master of what kinds of checks you can have your players and your total crew on the ship make while out at sea. Some boats may come with a full complement of special officers already ready to go that the player characters don't have to worry about. In other situations, you may have your player characters fill these special officer roles, or can even base an entire campaign or adventure around finding the best possible crew for your ship and give them a more personal connection when they finally set off at sea with the crew that they gathered in true Mass Effect 2 style. Starting with the man who's the cornerstone of the ship, the captain is a role that all ships have filled, like I just stated previously. With this, they are likely the character that the player characters will have the most interactions with, and it is from them that they'll likely be able to negotiate their passage aboard an existing ship, or may even get some kind of work contract or job from them that starts off their relationship. As such, captains are known as being highly intelligent, highly charismatic people, and are likely going to be these fast-talking, kind of trickery NPCs that the party is going to have a hard time kind of pulling the wool over their eyes. Captains can be rough militant types, or even the lovable scallywag like Jack Sparrow, but in all, they should be somewhat likable by some group of people. Otherwise, the ship is going to have a mutiny on its hands, which is a fun aspect of ship battles all in themselves. The next officer is going to be the first mate, which is more or less the right-hand man of the captain in the various aspects of running a ship. The first mate's main job is keeping morale alive on the ship, as he or she is the direct connection between the crew and the rest of the officers. They are responsible for the day-to-day discipline, organization of the ship that the captain may not have time for, and as such are also known as highly intelligent, charismatic people in order to keep this morale up and alive. They will have many similar qualities to the captain found on the ship, as they are also a charismatic leader. With this, they're actually closer probably to the crew than the captain themselves, and would serve as a great focal point for a mutiny if you're going that route with your campaign. Next up is the Boatswain, which is the tech expert on the ship, who should be well known for being knowledgeable for all things kind of mechanical on the ship, and is the go-to guy in terms of ship repairs. They are likely to have a great reputation on the ship as a carpenter and general fixer-upper, and are likely to have pulled the boat out of a tough situation in the past. This is if you're playing a great Boatswain, but if you're looking for more of a lazy person, they could be the most revolted person on the ship as well. This may be on the players as well if you're looking for a campaign where they've recruited only the best of the best. Next up is going to be the Quartermaster, and don't let yourself get fooled into thinking that this is the person in charge of all provisions on the ship, because that is for land armies, you landlubber. The Quartermaster on a naval ship is the person in charge of all things navigation, and as such, they are the person that is looked to for nautical charting, maps, and are likely to be the person who the player characters are directed to with all of their questions, including, are we there yet? And is there going to be a storm today? These people tend to be individuals with a high wisdom, and very good quartermasters are likely to be something like a druid with a keen connection to the ocean. Horrible quartermasters are likely to get the party and the naval crew lost at sea without provisions, stranded until God knows what happens. And the last officer on the ship is going to be my personal favorite, which is the cook. And the cook is the center of the ship's morale, as they are responsible for prepping all things food. Food is extremely important, especially in this ration kind of rare environment, and it's up to the cook to do the best with what they have. Exceptionally good cooks can increase the crew's morale and overall physical abilities, especially if they are given rare ingredients by the player characters. If rations do start to run low, even a great cook will not be able to produce fantastic motivating meals, and the ship's morale will suffer as a consequence. The rest of the crew is going to be the commoners or laborers of the crew that tend to the general day-to-day aspects of running the boat. They are generally not given specific statistics or asked to make individual roles, but are generally thought of more as a group of people that are encompassed in something called a quality score, which I had mentioned previously in this video. The quality score works similar to a loyalty score, which is talked about in Chapter 4 of the Dungeon Master Guide, but with a little bit of a significant change. The quality score is the crew's reflection of their overall health, experience, skill level, everything. The score is used for pretty much all aspects of naval travel and combat, and include things like dealing with hazards at sea, or even being able to hit someone with an attack. All crews will start with a quality score of +4, and this can range anywhere from -10 to +10. Things that might increase a crew's overall score is maintaining good health, having a naval victory at sea, finding lost treasure, or being allowed shore leave. Things that will take away from the quality score are things like ship casualties, continuous non-stop storms, low provisions, or just poor leadership. The quality score is one of the main aspects a Dungeon Master has to keep in mind when doing a naval adventure, as this is going to be a dynamic number that is constantly updating, and at certain thresholds will have very big impacts on the ship overall. I would say at minimum, a quality score should be updated at least every session that you're running with a ship, and more likely as a dynamic number, it should be updated multiple times throughout a session, but the choice is yours. Once the quality score hits 0 or lower, mutiny becomes a very real option aboard the ship. Because of this, any day that the quality score is 0 or lower, the captain must make a charisma-based check, either intimidation or persuasion, to the crew. They will roll a d20, and then whatever the quality score is will be added to the roll as well. This is either 0 or a negative number, so it can only decrease the roll, and thus a -10 quality score is much harder to come back with than a 0. With this, if the roll is greater than 9, nothing happens. Between 1 and 9, the quality score will drop even lower by a point, making it more difficult to succeed on the next day. And if the score is less than 0 after this roll and all the additional modifiers, the crew will mutiny. Once a mutiny occurs, the crew will become hostile to all of the officers aboard, killing, imprisoning, or just simply throwing them overboard. Now, a Dungeon Master could decide that one of the officers is in on the mutiny and have them lead it instead, but this will be up to them. The Dungeon Master can also get creative, as the officers may be able to bribe or simply buy back the loyalty of their crew, and can make different things like persuasion and intimidation checks to attempt to get them to stop. However, the DC of these rolls should be very high, as the captain has already had a chance to talk their way out of this situation and failed. In addition to recruiting the best crew, players can also go out of their way to upgrade their ships to make them larger than life. These upgrades range from a large variety of things, including new hulls to give them more health, to imbuing the ship with sentience. You can also get different aspects of your movement increased as well through things such as clockwork oars or sails that came from the plane air itself, allowing for greater movement. Or you can even do additional things such as like a dread aura, giving yourself more of like a ghost ship feel, to simple cosmetic upgrades as well. You can always purchase new weapons for your ships, allowing your ship to do more damage, and the list kind of goes on here and could be its own video all in itself. And I encourage you guys to take a look through the Ghosts of Saltmarsh section to see which of these upgrades excites you and your crew the most. So now you have a great crew, you have a shiny upgraded new ship, but you still haven't used it yet. Well, I think it's time to actually talk about traveling at sea, which is a little bit simpler than the rest of it. As I stated before, there's no such thing as speed with boats, but rather a travel pace, which will determine how fast your boat is able to go per day. and the distance you can cover will be determined by this. However, you're still going to have a lot of downtime while out at sea, and this time is going to be taken up by various activities such as foraging for food on islands, fishing, raising morale, etc. Various navigational checks can be done by the Dungeon Master to ensure that the boat isn't getting lost, and then the party or the captain can make various checks in terms of making the ship go into stealth or other various unique actions that a ship can take. Now to the part I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. How exactly do you run that epic seafaring battle that you've been dreaming of? Whether it's against a giant kraken or a fight to the death between two ships, the rules of ship combat in 5th edition attempt to mimic that of players versus monsters as close as possible. With this, the first move that you're always going to make, regardless of ship combat, is going to be the classic roll for initiative. Player characters will roll initiative and add their bonuses like they always do, but also the ship will be rolling for initiative as well. Like I said previously, you're going to have to take into account the ship's dexterity modifiers and the quality score when doing this. That means that the ship could go very early or very late in the combat rounds, as they could have anything from a -10 to a +10 modifier to their initiative from the quality score alone. Once it's the ship's turn in combat, it can take any of the various actions that are listed in its stat block that we had previously gone over, and they will be controlled by the captain, who is more likely than not going to be the Dungeon Master. With this, there are also some special actions that can be taken on your turn depending on which of the special officers the ship has on board. Things such as the take aim action, which can only be taken by the captain, first mate, or boatswain, allow for advantage on all the ship's attack rolls on its next turn. There's also something like full speed ahead, which allows for an additional movement speed on that turn. Control over all the non-officer crew members aboard a ship would make for utter chaos, and thus they are often just thought of as a group and generally aren't controlled individually in combat. It is thought that they are running the day-to-day functions of the ship even during combat, and thus don't help too much in terms of the overall fighting. The one time I would say that it is very important to keep these people in mind is large AoE magic fights that will eventually hit some of them in combat and are likely to result in casualties, as they have the commoner's stat block from the monster manual and thus not a lot of health. If it does seem like a lot of large AoEs are happening aboard the ship, crew casualties definitely need to be kept in mind, as once the crew members dwindle beneath a certain threshold, the ship itself won't be able to take as many actions on its turn, as it simply doesn't have the crew to accommodate for it. Combat isn't the only way to lose crew members aboard a ship, and Ghosts of Saltmarsh provides a litany of different hazards that players may run into while out on the open water. This includes things like fog, storms, fires, or even just the tight quarters of the ship causing emotional tensions to run high and huge fights to break out. Page 200 of Ghosts of Saltmarsh provides a nice table of the various different hazards that a Dungeon Master should keep in mind while out at sea, and then also lists a table for determining how high the hazard DC should be for the group check that is required to overcome them. If you don't know anything about group checks, they're actually found in Chapter 7 of the Player's Handbook, and will be generally what is used for this in order to overcome the hazard. When the crew encounters a hazard, certain hazards allow for the special officers on board to make skill checks that add to the overall rate of success of the hazard. In addition to this, the crew itself will make a hazard check that has a general D20 roll plus their quality score on top of it, and this will allow for the group check to determine how likely or how much the crew succeeds or does not succeed. Different outcomes will be determined based off of how well the crew succeeds overall, and these special officer checks will change depending on the type of hazard, as a boatswain isn't going to have a lot of help with something like a disease. Not everything out at sea is there just to kill you, however it may seem this way, as Ghosts of Saltmarsh also provides various different ocean environs that the player characters might encounter as well. These include things such as blue holes containing treasure, or perhaps Tauhagen waiting to murder you, whirlpools that may lead to other planes such as the plane of water or even the Underdark, buried, sunken ships that may contain treasure, or, like I said, even more things waiting to kill you, the choice is up to the Dungeon Master. Along with these ocean environs, Ghosts of Saltmarsh also provides entire maps of sunken treasure or shipwrecks, underwater ruins, and wrote entire kind of side quests that go along with them that Dungeon Masters can use to kind of fill in those gaps within their campaigns. There is a lot of content in this section that you may miss if you just simply go through the campaigns, so I highly encourage you guys to check it out, as it's one of my favorite sections of Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Though this is not technically about ships, so I'm going to leave it there, and we can talk about that in another video. And that is actually going to wrap up our in-depth view of all the new ship mechanics that were introduced into Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I hope by going over them, I was able to inspire some of you out there to start introducing ships into your next campaign, or even throw one into your current campaign. If you do, I would love to hear any of your stories down in the comments below. I know we went over a lot of different mechanics, and it seems overwhelming to you as a Dungeon Master to introduce a ship into your campaign, but I promise you the main thing is going to be keeping track of the actual boat statistics and the quality score. The rest of it you can look up while running your campaign, and will be something that comes with repetition like most other things in Dungeons & Dragons. If you don't already own Ghosts of Saltmarsh, I'm going to leave a link in the description below that helps me out a little bit, or you can check out my preview video that I'll also link down in the description. Please, please, please give me a like, favorite, and subscribe if you enjoyed any of my content, and you can check out my class ride for the Artificer over here, or any of my other content over here. I'm RPGMD, writing your prescription on all things Dice, Dragons, and Gaming, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.